At the end of December 1940, Brian Donlevy was being named for the male lead of Night of January 16th. Though not bearing a name remembered as a star, Brian Donlevy was a very good actor.
Go on. Talk your head off. He tried to kill me. Thought he had. Not one word that she has said is true.
I approve Donlevy. That same day at the end of December 1940, Brian Donlevy's intended co-star was named as Patricia Morrison. On earlier occasions, the story reports, Guts Regan had been planned for Fred MacMurray, Melvyn Douglas, Don Amici, and Ray Milland. Patricia Morrison could be wily and vicious, albeit in a subdued kind of way. A woman who could take charge.
Don't you believe in warnings?
Of course not. Who'd want a box like that?
I would.
You're not serious.
Oh, but I am.
Well, you put me in a very awkward position. I'm a collector, you know. And the collector buys but never sells.
But if the price were high enough... You're sorry. What about me? This is murder. What about Scotland Yard? Don't look. The man in front of the toy shop. Hamid, turn sharp right at the next corner and again at the next.
Fred MacMurray could play tough, repressed characters.
Okay, Joe.
MacMurray also played wise gentlemen in comedies and dramas, and played many love scenes.
Okay, you're tough. What's your angle?
Harvey says you got a shipment going out. He says it clears the harbor tonight. The only thing I'm going to tell Harvey is what boat the stuff is on. But first you got to tell me. I picked that up when I was on the lam. Barbecuing the bloodhounds they sent after me. I thought a couple of things about you. No, I don't.
Also considered was Melvyn Douglas for the role of Guts Regan. Douglas was then well established as a leading man, and the year prior to this 1940 news story had starred opposite Greta Garbo in Ninotchka. We're seeing him in the year following this report.
Listen, I know I'm just a poor, ignorant insurance dope, and I don't know anything about Stravinsky. But we've been married for 6 years, and I think I've made you a pretty good husband. When I ask you a question, you still ought to do me the courtesy of answering it.
Now, this isn't funny either. I love my wife. I've loved her for 6 years. For 6 years we've been together. And along comes a guy like you and breaks everything up just because you've nothing else to do. You're not going to get away with it.
In the last of 3 looks at a story from December 30th, 1940, we're given Amici's reason for refusing the role of Guts Regan. Stanwyck lost the role of Karen Andre for the 2nd time, counting the Broadway production. She may have known a sharp insult to deliver to the decision-makers at Paramount.
You're supposed to be a smart guy. If it was raining $100 bills, you'd be out looking for a dime you lost someplace.
The movie The Night of January 16th was released in 1941. Ayn Rand wrote in 1968 that only one line of her dialogue made it into the movie, and that was,
"The court will now adjourn until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning."
She stated also that a few character names were otherwise all of what was hers, which made it into the movie. The leading lady was Ellen Drew, and we see her here playing, not Karen Andre, but Kit Lane. The character name was changed. In looking at her expression, in a situation calling for seriousness, you might think that it has that off-kilter quality of supporting players in Three Stooges comedies. Well, that's because this movie is played as though the roles were supporting parts in Three Stooges comedies. Viewers of the movie don't get a sense that the events are important, and they don't even get the expertly timed slapstick of a movie actually featuring the Stooges. This scene with a drunk has no counterpart in the play. The drunk merely turns up and leads the principal characters on a plot detour that has no bearing on later story developments. The actor playing the drunk does inject life into his scenes, for he was Cecil Kellaway, a wonderful personality whose talent would be matched nicely to an Ayn Rand role in Love Letters, where he played the caretaker. The leading man role was a character not in the play. He is a nephew of someone in the play, although Ayn Rand's play never mentioned a nephew. He was played by Robert Preston, years before he wowed audiences as the Music Man on Broadway and in the movie. He is seen here in a 1940 film where his co-star on the right is Doris Nolan, the original Karen Andre of Night of January 16 on Broadway. While this outrage was assembled in Hollywood, Ayn Rand was in New York seeking interest in a new play of hers called Think Twice. There will be no news clippings or film clips on this one because Think Twice was never produced. No producer ever even agreed to do it. One of Ayn Rand's characters is an independent-minded actress whose talents were misused as the leads in such passé plays as Peter Pan and Little Women, an invented tragedy called Daughter of the Slums, and, would you believe it, The Yellow Ticket. The Yellow Ticket, which Fox made a strong film of in 1931, depicting a woman's plight after the Russian government stigmatizes her, had first been a play first performed on Broadway in 1914, and Ayn Rand would have good cause to know about this. It had been produced by the very Al H. Woods, who produced Night of January 16th, 21 years later. 1943 was a great year for Ayn Rand. May 7th was the publication date for her novel The Fountainhead. Before the year was out, she sold the Fountainhead movie rights to Warner Brothers and moved back to California for that movie. Warner Brothers had not been the only studio interested. They aren't even named in this variety item from just 1 month and 2 days after The Fountainhead was published, but MGM and 20th Century Fox are. The absence of the winning bidder from this story isn't limited to The Fountainhead. Immediately above, there's no mention of 20th Century Fox being interested in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, but they ended up the winner who made the superb 1945 movie of that book. Warner Brothers was good for Ayn Rand. There, she met a producer about to leave Warner Brothers and who thus soon hired her to write screenplays for him at his new independent production company aligned with Paramount. In July 1944, syndicated Hollywood columnist Ed Hopper interviewed Ann Sheridan and reported that Sheridan was devouring The Fountainhead. Ann Sheridan was contracted with Warner Brothers, so she may have been reading to see herself as heroine Dominique. Some 1950 clips let us see how she might have played a defiant woman emotionally indifferent to her husband.
Oh yes, I'm that bitter, selfish, vicious wife, the cause of his unhappiness, the cause of his failure. Is that what he told you? Is that what he told you? In the past 10 hours, I've met 3 men. 3 men who all put together haven't known Frank for one fraction of the length of time I have. Yet they all know him better than I do. I found out how Frank Johnson really feels about me. That at the first chance, his first excuse, he took off, ran. That he didn't even think enough of me to confide in me that he was ill. Then at the store, in the faces of those mannequins, I saw what he really sees in me. All right, it's okay if that's the way he feels about it, but if he wants his ampules, he'll have to come out of hiding and get them. I guess I was the one that was mixed up. A lot of it's my fault anyway. I haven't been much of a wife.
The producer who hired Ayn Rand to write for his new independent production company was Hal Wallace, and we see reported here in a July 21st, 1944 piece that he was to have Ayn Rand write The Loves of Lola Montez. The columnist, but not necessarily the producer, thought of Joan Fontaine as the star. We'll see how Fontaine conveyed the emotions of being in love.
I wish for you to be best man at my wedding.
Well, I guess so. Do you have a bridegroom in mind?
And he's perfect.
Oh, come now. No man is perfect. What's his name?
Why, Dick Forsyth.
Well, what do you know? So you're really getting married. Mm-hmm. Is there anything I can do?
I wish for a beautiful wedding dress.
2 months later, it was reported that Ayn Rand was adapting Love Letters for Wallace. Unlike the Lola Montez project, Love Letters made it to film. What viewers of the film might not have known was that Ann Richards was originally to play the lead role eventually played by Jennifer Jones. Ann Richards didn't get taken off Love Letters. Instead, she was assigned a smaller role. This item says Ann Richards and Jennifer Jones are romantic rivals in the movie, but that's questionable at best. At Warner Brothers, casting was announced for The Fountainhead, Humphrey Bogart and Barbara Stanwyck. Here's Humphrey Bogart.
Oh, yeah, I'm looking for a good mystery on something off the beaten track like the Maltese Falcon.
Humphrey Bogart became a huge star with Casablanca a little over 2 years earlier. He was playing serious, noble, fair, resolved men.
Mind if I look at it?
A return to the mean Bogart was years off. Another assignment from Hal Wallace to Ayn Rand was adapting a novel called The Crying Sisters. Ann Richards was again to star. Ayn Rand was assigned to dramatize the life of Peter Tchaikovsky. As reported in this March 22, 1945 item, Hal Wallace planned to tell the story of the great composer, and though the article doesn't mention it, Tchaikovsky lived his life in the same country as Ayn Rand suffered her childhood. Ayn Rand had mentioned Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto in her novel The Fountainhead as a favorite of a young man pursuing inspiration. A month later, it could be reported that Wallace's Tchaikovsky film might be made with the cooperation of Vladimir Horowitz and Leonard Bernstein. Vladimir Horowitz had proven extremely popular, his concerts heard on nationwide radio, his performances with conductor Arturo Toscanini raising fantastic amounts of money for the United States war effort. In March 1944, Bernstein had made himself a national reputation as a 25-year-old assistant conductor who, on a moment's notice and without rehearsal, conducted a symphony program on a radio broadcast when the planned conductor took sick. A year after Ayn Rand was assigned to write, a report would appear, in October 1946, that Wallace wanted James Mason to play the composer and that Wallace would film in England. Mason was then a rising British star who was still 3 years from his first American film. His decade of huge international stardom would be the 1950s. June 1945 marked the first time that the name of Ayn Rand appeared on screen and in ads as a screenwriter. She and writer Robert Smith shared credit for the screenplay based on Smith's story. Rand said privately that the movie also reflected the influences of the director and the producer. Elizabeth Scott became a star in this, her first film. In this clip from the year after You Came Along, producer Hal Wallace again showcased Elizabeth Scott's ability to play a take-charge woman who nonetheless is willing to recognize her emotional vulnerability.
Want a lift any place on the way to the bus station?
You talked me into it.
You talk awful cold-blooded about them, don't you?
That's life.
But I'm so glad you came to have a drink with me tonight. I was so lonesome, I'd like to have died. You're smart. Maybe you think I've been trying too hard to get acquainted.
Maybe you have.
Maybe you think that's wrong.
Maybe it's too soon to tell.
Top billed was Bob Cummings in the role of Bob Collins. The character named Bob Collins on the door and is wearing a military uniform may make you think you're watching Bob Cummings in You Came Along, but actually this is from Cummings' 1950s television sitcom. He brought back his earlier character name and continued his good-natured conviviality and his comical voice mannerisms.
Colonel Collins here. Oh, yes, General. Yes, I intend to be in all day, sir. An assignment, sir? Well, sir, I have no idea what you intend to ask me to do, but whatever it is, I stand ready to do it, sir.
2 months after You Came Along was released, Love Letters reached theaters, and for the first time, Ayn Rand's name appeared as sole screenwriter. Love Letters had completed filming 2 months prior to You Came Along doing so, but was held back while the more topical You Came Along was rushed to screen a month after Germany surrendered in World War II. As you see here, Paramount's advertising materials for Love Letters touted, in conjunction with her screenwriter's name, that she was the author of The Fountainhead, stating that fact under her name. Although the book had been published 2¼ years earlier, in 1945 The Fountainhead appeared on more bestseller lists than it had the prior 2 years. Come October, several newspapers had fun reporting that Hal Wallace had bought screen rights to the play Beggars Are Coming to Town several weeks before its opening. Less fun was had by audiences inside the theater, condemning the play to a run of 25 performances. For this, Wallace paid $100,000 and guaranteed percentages of the profits to the play's backers. The New York Times review of the play indicates that this is the type of play Ayn Rand would regard as the opposite of what her aesthetic theories regard as good fiction. A nostalgic gangster story where the gangsters talk instead of shoot, and where a leggy cigarette girl is the lead woman character, removing an opportunity for a woman character who is intelligent. So, who did Hal Wallace get to write a screenplay? Ayn Rand! This announcement appeared in Variety, December 3, 1945. On February 4, 1946, a news item reported that Eddie Albert had been hired for the lead, and in May, Beggars Are Coming to Town was named as one of 3 projects which Wallace was planning. But Beggars Are Coming to Town then sank from mention. Eventually, the lead role went to Burt Lancaster. The film was released 2 years after the announcement about Eddie Albert, and the title had been changed to I Walk Alone. Elizabeth Scott and Kirk Douglas also starred. Charles Schnee, Robert Smith, and John Bright were credited for screenwriting and adaptation.